Hello everybody, happy World Penguin Day. We're here at University Parks in Oxford to celebrate World Penguin Day and try and answer as many of the wonderful questions as possible that you've been sending in. So we have a stack of questions here that have been sent in from school children around Oxfordshire and beyond, but if you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask, then please do send those in to us too, and you can do that by writing in the comment section underneath the video. So just to start off with, we've been asked, do penguins only eat fish? And I think this is a really good one to start off with because it's something we get asked quite a lot, and the answer is no. So they also eat something called krill, which is a very important organism. It's something that we call a keystone species in the Southern Ocean ecosystem, which means that it's fundamental to keeping the whole ecosystem stable. If the populations of Antarctic krill change, then that has an effect on the animals all the way up the food chain. So they are Antarctic krill. They are a small crustacean about this big, and you can help penguins by not eating things like krill oil, which are made from them, because we're a little concerned that if the fisheries for krill grow too big, then this could have an effect on the penguins. It's not just krill and fish either. They eat squid. Can you think of anything else?
Lobster krill, which is a bit bigger up in places like the Falklands.
Yeah, so it depends on where they live as well. Penguins stretch all the way up to and just over the equator, so depending on where their habitat is, then they'll have slightly different diets. And of course their diet will vary depending on the species of penguin as well. We have another question which has been sent in by Eddie Bailey, who is 6 from Chipping Norton. And she's asked us an excellent question, which is, what do you do underwater? And I really like this question, and I think you will as well, because people always think of penguins as waddling along quite clumsily on the land, but actually they spend an awful lot of their time in the water. They can swim really fast, and they dive down and are able to shoot up underneath their prey as ambush predators. So in answer to the question, they go to water to feed, to hunt, to catch food for themselves and also for their chicks. And they can move very efficiently through the water by doing something called porpoising, which is when they leap out of the water to give them less resistance when they're moving. Do you have something
I've got a question related to that from Adam Smith, and he says, does their wing motion differ from a flying motion? And yes, it does to a bit. So they are flying underwater, but it's largely they're using that to propel themselves forward. So they don't just get push on the downstroke, but also a bit on the upstroke. And it's like a propeller, but in one dimension. It's kind of flapping and pushing them forwards. And also I've got a question related to that, which are, how fast are penguins?
This has been sent by a dog.
Oh,
a very clever dog.
Very clever dog. He asks, how fast are penguins? So in the water, when they're porpoising, that swim underwater, jump out to breathe, and then go back in, that Fiona was mentioning, that might be about 9 to 12 miles an hour. And the fastest we think they go is about 25 miles an hour, which is pretty good. That's like a car going through a residential area.
Is that the Gentoo?
I would say that was Gentoos were probably the fastest.
Yes. That kind of relates to maybe how deep do they dive as well, which I don't know if anybody has sent that in, but it's quite often asked.
Yeah, so that... so one of the things, a lot of these questions are asking about the differences between penguins, and there's quite a lot of variety. So little penguins in Australia are really quite small. They're about this big. And an emperor penguin could easily be this big.
I should have introduced him.
Hello. Happy World Penguin Day. The bigger penguins are usually found more south, where it's colder, and that's partly how they can survive the cold. But those are often also associated with deeper divers. So where they go to find food, they need to go deeper. So the emperor penguin holds the record, and we think the deepest dive recorded is over 500 meters. So that's half a kilometer deep. king penguins might go as deep as about 300 metres in their search for myctophid fish and squid. But then things like gentoos, the smaller ones, they're often much shallower diving, anywhere between 30 and 100 metres.
You just touched on there about temperatures, so we have another question here which is from Max, who is 6, from Whitney, and he's asking, do you get cold? So do penguins get cold?
Yes, they do, and in the extreme we know they try and avoid this by huddling. I mean, the Antarctic penguins, this is one of the things they have to counter, and there's strategies such as huddling. There's having really good feathers. The feathers on penguins are fascinating. It's like a down jacket. So there's a waterproof layer, and then below that there's a downy layer that's really warm, and they trap air in that like a down jacket, and they even take that air down right with them when they're diving, so it squeezes down, but they keep the air to insulate them. They've also got a big blubbery layer. I don't know why I'm pointing to an inflatable penguin when I say this. They have a blubbery layer, so they are quite fat. The other things they do is they reduce their flippers. So as you get further south, those species have slightly shorter, squatter flippers, and they have a heat exchange mechanism. So they try and reduce the amount of heat that goes in blood to these. Otherwise, these would be big radiators. So they try and recapture some of the heat from the blood before it goes out to their extremes. Well. So both their flippers and their feet.
Which prevents their feet from freezing, which people always wonder about.
So related to that, one of the problems is that they're very good at retaining heat. They're very good both with their behaviour and with their anatomy. So they can overheat. And I would say in some cases overheating is as much or more of a risk than getting cold.
Definitely, especially you have temperate penguins living in quite warm environments. They're obviously better adapted for that. But when we go down to Antarctica, you can certainly sometimes see the chicks splat out on the ground because they're beginning to feel quite warm. So yeah, that's not something everybody thinks about because we're always worried about them getting cold and having to huddle together.
But that actually ties together quite nicely. So the adaptations against the cold, people think of this as snowy and icebergs, but the adaptations against the cold are actually probably more relevant when they're in the water. So even those Galapagos penguins and Humboldts that are hot on land, they still have to go to sea to swim in what's usually quite cold water. And water, you lose heat in water a lot faster than you lose it in air. So we think most of these adaptations against the cold are actually more important when they're swimming.
And also linking back to that, we were saying about how penguins can trap the air in their feathers, and there was a study that showed they can actually use the air in the feathers and expel out those bubbles, which gives them less resistance when they're swimming through the water. So you can see how all of these adaptations link together and go back to what we were talking about with penguins being very fast. So yeah.
That also touches a bit on this question, why are some penguins small and why are some big? So that's partly heat. The ones that are in warm or temperate regions seem to be smaller. That's partly diving as to how deep they need to dive. But yeah, the bigger ones generally are further south.
Yeah. This one also maybe links through quite nicely. Zane, who's 3 from Kidlington, asks, where do penguins go in the winter? So we were just talking about them keeping warm in the sea. So when they're not in the breeding season during the summer, they are out foraging at sea, and they can go variable distances from their breeding grounds depending on the species. So certain species like gentoos don't go very far, whereas others can go, would you say, sort of thousands of kilometres?
So macaronis will go a long way and they will be out towards the polar front, which is where the Southern Ocean meets the South Atlantic and South Pacific. Emperor penguins famously stay over winter, so they are actually incubating the egg and then nurturing the chick over winter. King penguins are quite similar, but they mostly go to sea and they leave the chick. So king penguins, the chick grows as much as it can in summer, and then it's left with this big fluffy coat, and they largely fend for themselves over winter until the adults come back and feed them to finish and molt.
Great. Shall we move on to something different? So Poppy, who's 9 from Whitney, has asked, do you sleep standing up? So penguins are quite unusual in that, unlike us, they don't go to bed at night and sleep for a few hours. They can actually just nap for short periods throughout the day and the night. And they can sleep standing up, but not always like that. They can sleep in the water, sitting down with their head under their wing. We don't have any pictures, but
I think we'll tweet pictures.
Yeah.
Where we can, we'll tweet picture responses to these questions later. So we'll be on Twitter all day, both with Oxford Sparks and with Penguin Watch. And we would like to, we will hopefully answer these with evidence, with a picture so that you can see what we mean.
I'm going to team these two pictures together. Do penguins bite? And from Mickey the dog from Donington, what do penguins taste like? I have never eaten a penguin myself, but some of the early sailors and explorers had to, and Tom informs me there was variable responses.
So a lot of the early explorers actually, some of them planned to eat penguins, and some of them got into trouble, like Shackleton. And if they were starving, it seems that they didn't care. But it also seems to be that if the cook was good and they took the fat off and cooked them well, people like the taste. But opinions vary. But you should not be eating penguins now. There's no need.
Except for the biscuit. Do they bite though?
Except for the biscuit, yes. We love penguin biscuits. So you can improve the taste of penguins by covering them in chocolate.
Scientifically proven. Penguins aren't aggressive towards us when we go down, but I imagine if you were to do something silly, like get too near a chick or a nest or an egg, they would defend themselves, which is only fair.
I've definitely been bitten.
Tom has been bitten by a penguin.
Yep.
So yes, but don't get so close. What else have we got? We touched on this one already. We touched on the fact that penguins only live in the southern hemisphere, apart from a few of the Galapagos penguins that cross over the equator to the north. But somebody has asked why. They evolved down in the southern hemisphere, and I think there's a question about how long have they existed. So they evolved in the Paleocene, about 35 million years ago. And really, they can't now travel to similar environments in the north, because that would involve crossing over zones where they wouldn't be adapted, and that's also why we don't have penguins or polar bears, contrary to what we see on Christmas cards. Am I rustling? Sorry. Is that better? Anything to add about that?
Partly also the niches in the northern hemisphere are taken, so there are similar birds to penguins in the north that might outcompete them if they try to take them.
Hello, welcome back. Sorry, one of the side effects of being in the park is that we might have a few technical issues. But anyway, we're back, and we thought it might be nice to answer how many species of penguins there are. So we always think of the ones living down in Antarctica in the cold, but in fact there are 18 species of penguin, although this has been debated a little bit in the past. And my papers are flying away. There are 2 true Antarctic species of penguin, the emperor and the Adelie. And there are a number of others that live in subantarctic regions, such as the king, which is the closest relative of the emperor, and the chinstrap and the gentoo, which are closely related to the Adelie in a little family group called the Pygoscelids. But then you have a number of temperate penguins living in regions such as South Africa, South America, New Zealand, Australia, places like that. So you have the smallest species of penguin called the little blue or the fairy penguin, which lives in Australia, and that's only about 1 kilogram in weight compared to the emperor, which can be about 35 kilos, I think, and be over 1 metre tall. So you've got this massive range and diversity in terms of their phenotype. And then you have penguins that live in all sorts of different habitats. So the fieldland crested penguin, which lives in a forest environment. burrowing penguins, Magellanics, which live in sort of small burrows in the Falklands. Probably can't go through all of them, but any other main niches I've missed?
No, that's good. There is a fantastic cartoon that's now on our Twitter feed. It's by Peppermint Narwhal, which is phenomenal, and a good polar link. So have a look at that, because it exaggerates the features. So it shows you the size range, and it shows you the different characters in how they recognise each other and things like that. So I think we'll be tweeting about those and pointing out each species we're talking about on that.
Based on that, I should say we've taken over the Oxford Sparks Twitter page for today, and we have, of course, our own Penguin Watch Twitter. So if you look out for either of those, and you'll see all the things that we've been talking about. And also check out the Oxford Sparks Instagram, which we are also taking over today, thanks to the kind people at Oxford Sparks.
If we can make that one work.
Yeah, we're not very...
Anyway, moving on, things where we are tech savvy. So someone asks, what is Penguin Watch? Well, that's very easy. So we have a whole load of time-lapse cameras all around the Southern Ocean. And in fact, we're branching out into other areas. And what Penguin Watch does is it allows you, in fact, we really want your help to go through all of these images we have. So when we think of threats to penguins, there's climate change, there's potentially fishing, there's potentially direct disturbance and pollution, depending on where you look. The problem is that it's really quite hard to monitor all these threats and what to do about them. Because, you know, if you only monitor one or two colonies, so maybe those don't behave like normal colonies. So what we've done, we put these time-lapse cameras all around the Southern Ocean. They continually record what's going on in loads of different colonies. By you going through and clicking on each penguin, on each chick, on each egg, that tells us things like when they breed and how successful they are. So how many chicks survive to fledging and things like that. And it's that that's giving us this really important picture of what is going on in the Southern Ocean. Which species are doing well, which are doing poorly. We will also be launching aerial photos to count these over time and from historic photos. But please go there. There's more information on penguins, and also you get to see stuff and you know that you're making a difference.
Yeah, so you can access that through the Zooniverse website, which is the platform that we're part of, and there's many other projects on there as well that you can get involved with, or you can go to penguinwatch.org. And as Tom said, it's really valuable to us. We have over 100 cameras now, each taking over 8,000 images a year, so you can see how with just the two of us we couldn't possibly get through any of that data without your help. So it's a nice thing for you to do, and people find it quite addictive and get a lot of benefit from us, but it also really helps us, so that would be amazing if you got involved. And I might preempt the question, which is, can we not automate this? Because whenever we tell people about Penguin Watch, they say, oh, you know, there's so much technology now, surely you can use computer vision, you know, that sort of technology you have on your camera when the little box pops up around somebody's face. And the answer is that we can, and actually there's a team just over the road here in Oxford who are working on that and have created an algorithm which automatically detects penguins. But that is a work in progress, and also something that we want to use alongside the citizen science. So I'd want to say that it's not going to be a replacement, and we still really need the citizen science, both for difficult images, different types of images, and also to train these algorithms, because they can't possibly exist without a learning data set. So that's just for people who might be wondering. We're still
training that on new species, and we also want to show people the unusual photos. Humans are still so much better at detecting and potentially interpreting the unusual activity compared to computers. So they very much are hand in hand.
Absolutely, and there's even a place on Penguin Watch where you can write comments, and there's a talk forum where if you spot something unusual, then you can flag it up, and people are doing that all the time, and a computer could never say, hey, there's something really interesting going on here, what's that penguin doing, what's that predator, things like that, and that's really valuable to us.
what got you into your job? Asks Nick from Whitney. The main thing is curiosity. So I definitely I wanted to do some kind of ecology and conservation, and I accessed penguins more via fisheries. So I thought I was going to go into being a fisheries biologist, and then gradually worked my way south and more penguin. But it's fascination, and also a desire to improve the world or to do something that makes a difference.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely with that last bit. I've had a different route to Tom. My background is also in biology, but I then went on to study climate change, and my aim was really to combine those two and look at the way in which climate change is affecting some sort of biological system. And I've always been attracted to the snowy polar environments and the animals that live there. And when I heard about the project and the way in which it uses citizen science to gain data, I found it really interesting, and I've really just gone from there. And everybody loves penguins, although I didn't always know I would be working on them. So shall we finish there, or were there any questions that anybody has sent in? That sounds great then. Okay.
So in that case,
cool.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
and from us, happy World Penguin Day. Thank you.
Thank you.